Well, it's better than Son of Batman. Justice League Throne of Atlantis. I can't exactly say I was excited to go into this thing because the track record for the DC animated movies so far, based off the New 52, their whole new continuity that they're building, not been great. We had Justice League War, which was a very uneven start, and then it immediately took a nosedive with Son of Batman, which was terrible. But let's start positive on this thing. Most of the stuff that worked in Justice League War still works here. Primarily the action. The action is very well staged. It is fairly regularly paced. It's a little bit bloodier than I think it needs to be. And it feels a bit more gratuitous this time than it did in Justice League War. Not quite as bad as Son of Batman was, but it seems unnecessary. Like when I see one of the superheroes take down an enemy, I'm fine with them just punching the guy and he drops. I don't need him to be cut in half and blood spray everywhere. Maybe I just grew out of that, I don't know. But the action's still pretty good, although I can't give this movie quite the same pass on that basis that I gave to Justice League War, because while the action is good, I don't like that this appears to very clearly be an action franchise now. I mean, the older DC animated movies, they always had action, but I never would have described them as action movies, with one or two exceptions. For the most part, you just wouldn't lump them as that. You wouldn't sell them to somebody as it's an action movie. That's kind of what they are. That's kind of what they've all been. And I'm not loving that as a general trend. But again, the action is good. There's no sore spots in the voice cast this time. And there were some pretty big ones when we dealt with Son of Batman. So that's a nice improvement. Again, about on par with what we got with Justice League War. Now, they've had one fairly big improvement, which is Wonder Woman. Because in Justice League War, she was so bad. I was grinding my teeth every time she was on. Thankfully, that's been largely corrected. Because first of all, they've recast. I feel a little bit bad because I think Michelle Monaghan's delivery in Justice League War was probably the fault of the writers and the director. They did replace her with Rosario Dawson, who gives a bit more of that stoic strength that I like and expect from Wonder Woman, which is also an indicator that they're now writing her properly as opposed to the ridiculous, stupid fish out of water jokes they were using her for in Justice League War. So massive improvement for her. There was another casting replacement. They recast the voice for Green Lantern. Now, it's now Nathan Fillion, which is not a bad thing. I like Nathan Fillion. I like him as Green Lantern. The thing is, though, there was nothing wrong with the guy who they had doing Green Lantern in Justice League War. You know, they fixed something that wasn't broken, so that struck me as a little odd. Most of the new blood's pretty solid, and really the big focus here is on Arthur Curry, aka Aquaman. This is, at the heart of it, his story, and his story is handled fairly well for the most part. Unfortunately, this really would have been a much better movie if it wasn't a Justice League movie, because the two don't really cross paths for a while. I mean, the Justice League is kind of aware that there's something going on under the sea, and they're looking into that, and Arthur Curry is dealing with his own personal issues and sort of coming to a realization of who he is and how he's torn between two worlds. The Justice League factors in very peripherally to that, and then the thing, as it hit its climax, really started to fall apart. I'll come back to that in a bit. If they're gonna remain so rigid to this 75-minute runtime, they really needed to drop the rest of the Justice League out of this and just make it an Aquaman movie. I feel like we could have gotten a better depth and better impact out of Aquaman's side of the story, because there's a lot of stuff in there that feels like there's a lot more to this story than you're giving us, particularly in terms of Atlantis and the backstory of the royal family that's already in place, Aquaman's mother and his half-brother. And there's a struggle going there, and you feel that there's history, but the movie does not have the time to delve in anything more than a surface level. Where this really falls down is in Orm, who is the primary villain. He's just incredibly one-dimensional. Now, he should be a pretty deep villain, because you think about it, he has lived in Atlantis. He's pure Atlantean. He has a right to the throne, but his mother, she would rather have his half-brother, who has never even lived in Atlantis and knows nothing about it, take the throne rather than him. I mean, that's a legitimate gripe for somebody to have. He's like, you're gonna bring in this guy who you didn't raise, you know virtually nothing about, and you're gonna let him sit on the throne? When I've lived with these people and I know this world, there's real drama to be mined from that, but they make him so over-the-top evil, and they just push it too far that it doesn't have the impact that the setup could have really brought. And I also need to point out, because I mentioned that really the climax is where things start to fall apart, and where the film pretty much lost me completely was as we went into the final climactic fight. Now, I'll put a spoiler warning up on this, but I don't think I'm ruining any surprises. I mean, of course it ends in a big fight. They all end in big fights. Firstly, Orm himself is really dumb. Like, he's got to be the worst military tactician in the history of ever, because the way that he begins his assault on the surface world is with a massive tidal wave, and the Justice League sees this thing coming, and they know it's gonna hit all up and down the East Coast. Primarily they focus on Metropolis, naturally. So this thing is approaching Metropolis, and they say flat out, we can't stop that. They're not gonna be able to save everybody. And the tidal wave comes up to the city and stops. It stops dead, parts like a curtain, and there's Orm's army. Why would you have a tidal wave come up just to hide your army and not have the tidal wave actually hit the city and do a bunch of damage? That's like dropping a bomb, but when the bomb lands, it doesn't explode. It opens up and there's your fighting squad and they just come out. And you know what? Coming back to the violence, the film really causes a problem for itself when it comes to the climactic battle, because, you know, when they take on the Atlantean army, they are killing them left and right. Now, that kind of eases off about midway through the battle, and I figured out why at the end. Because Arthur is going to take down Orm, and he is going to assume command, and he is now the ruler of Atlantis, and suddenly, you know, these aren't the enemies anymore, these are our allies. But you shoot yourself in the foot doing that when only about 10 minutes ago, we were watching them get killed left and right. And suddenly you can't help but go, how many people who thought they were fighting to defend their nation did our heroes just slaughter? Man, this review's gotten weird on me, because I started off saying it was not that bad, and now I've spent so much time ripping into it. Look, it's not great. I'm certainly not going to say it's great. I hesitate, honestly, to even say that it's good. It is better than Son of Batman. Son of Batman just aggravated me from beginning to end. This one started out fine, started out okay, but then it just went downhill, and it never recovered. But it makes me not excited for the movies that are in this continuity. At this point, the only stuff I'm going to be looking forward to anymore is the stuff that is separate from this continuity, like Assault on Arkham was. So I guess I'm just gonna throw my feelers out there. I personally feel that the caliber of films that have been coming out, this new continuity based on the New 52, is just as a whole several notches down from pretty much the entire lineup of films that were being done prior, the more standalone stuff. Do you think that's the case? Do you think it's about the same? Or do you think that these are actually better than what we used to be getting? Whatever it is, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. As for me, I'll be back as soon as I can get my next fix.